Hello everybody, welcome to another video exclusive edition of Filmsplaining. I'm your host Martyn Strange. March is Women's History Month, so I thought it would be a perfect time to take a minute to celebrate some of my very favorite women filmmakers. These are in no particular order. I'm not ranking these filmmakers in any certain way because I love all of their work. First is Agnès Varda. Agnès Varda is a Belgian-born French photographer, writer, director, and actress, born in 1928, and she died in 2019. Varda is well known for using non-professional actors in her films. She often shot on location, and she often investigated the areas where fiction and non-fiction meet in cinema. She was an instrumental figure in the French New Wave, helping to popularize lots of new editing techniques and these naturalistic performances that the French New Wave is known for having. Agnès Varda married fellow filmmaker Jacques Denis in 1962, and they were together up until his death in 1990. She became the first female director to win an honorary Oscar as well. Her most notable films include Cléo from 5 to 7 from 1962. This is my personal favorite of her works that I've seen. It's a very dreamlike, but also very honest and open look at the life of a young woman, a young singer, musician. It's also probably her best known work. Another film is Le Bonheur from 1965. I just watched this film last night. It's very interesting in its use of a narrative structure, in that for the most part you're watching a very particular kind of story, and then the last 20 minutes things radically change and you realize you've been watching a very different story than the one you initially thought you were. Also, Black Panthers from 1968. This is a fantastic short documentary that she made that is available to watch, I believe, on HBO Max. It's fascinating. It's a real, true look at the people who were involved in this movement from a ground's eye view. Other notable films include Vagabond from 1985, Kung Fu Master from 1988, her first autobiographical kind of documentary, The Beaches of Agnes from 2008, and then Faces Places from 2017, which was co-directed with the photographer and artist J.R. This is probably the documentary that actually introduced me to Agnès Varda and her work. I didn't really know her before seeing this, and it's a beautiful little portrait of her life, their friendship together, kind of taking a trip down memory lane and going back to all these places where she was active when she was younger, and they are taking portraits and photographs of people. It's a beautiful little film, and I hope you seek it out. Next is Chloé Zhao. Chloé Zhao is a Chinese-born screenwriter and director, born in 1982. She came to prominence for her highly critically acclaimed first two features, Songs My Brothers Taught Me and The Writer. Chloé Zhao studied under Spike Lee at the NYU School, Tisch School of the Arts. She's very drawn to small-town stories, rural stories about real issues with real people. She also uses mostly non-actors, at least in her early work. Chloé Zhao is very painterly with light and color. There is a very beautiful naturalism that her films are filled with. Her film The Writer in 2017 was this beautiful neo-Western that really put her on the map, which led to making the critically acclaimed and Oscar-winning Nomadland from 2020, starring Frances McDormand. Nomadland won Best Picture and Best Director, making Chloé Zhao just the second woman to ever win Best Director. She followed this up with Eternals for Marvel in 2021, and I know this doesn't have a very good reputation. I personally didn't care for the film at all, and I really hope that she gets back to making small, intimate movies like her early work. I'm very curious to see what Chloé Zhao does next. Then we have Claire Denis. Claire Denis is a French writer, director, and professor, born in 1946. She was raised in colonial French Africa, and the majority of her work deals with themes of colonialism in West Africa, as well as socio-political issues in modern-day France. She is a very, very political filmmaker, and she often tries to face these issues head-on and with extreme criticism. Some of her films can be kind of so loaded with these ideas that they can sort of turn off the audience a little bit. She's not a filmmaker who's going to be for everyone, but she's made some really fascinating, interesting work. Early in her career, she worked as an AD for many influential directors, including Jacques Rivette, Costa Gavras, and Wim Wenders. She also collaborates very frequently with Juliette Binoche, who has starred in many of her films. The majority of Claire Denis' films have been now included in the Criterion Collection. You can find most of them there. Her notable films include Chocolat from 1988, Beau Travail from 1999, a fascinating look at fragile, toxic masculinity in armed forces. Trouble Every Day from 2001 is also a very well-known film, one of the New French Extremity works dealing with sex and violence and vampirism. Let the Sun Shine In from 2017, High Life from 2018, starring Mia Goth and Robert Pattinson, a very interesting little sci-fi movie that not a lot of people saw. And then Stars at Noon from 2022, her most recent work, which won the Grand Prix at the Cannes Film Festival, starring Margot Qualley. I watched this movie and I liked many parts of it, but it didn't really cohesively work for me as a whole. She's a very interesting director, and I'm going to be covering more of her stuff in the near future on my podcast. Next is Elaine May. Elaine May is a legendary American actress, writer, comedian, born in 1932. She gained notoriety in the 50s for her improv comedy shows with Mike Nichols as the comedy duo Nichols and May. She has won BAFTA, Grammy, and Tony Awards in her career, and she had a very big second act performing on stage on Broadway in New York. She earned acclaim for screenplays that she wrote for Warren Beatty, including Heaven Can Wait and Reds, as well as Mike Nichols, including The Birdcage and Wolf. She has many, many uncredited rewrites on other scripts as well. She won an honorary Oscar in 2022. She only directed 4 films so far, and they are A New Leaf from 1971. I just recently saw this movie, and it's utterly delightful. It's so funny. I wish all rom-coms were like this, because I would take 1 or 2 of these a year, every year, if we could get them. The Heartbreak Kid from 1972, probably her most best-known work, although it's impossible to find. It's not streaming anywhere, and there is no physical media release of it as of yet. Let's try and get this movie seen by more people. This needs to be available. Mikey and Nikki, a film from 1976 starring John Cassavetes and Peter Falk, which I will be covering very soon on the next season of my podcast. And then her last film, Ishtar, from 1987. This is also a very hard film to find, streaming-wise, so if you find it, please check it out. Next is Jane Campion. Jane Campion is a New Zealand filmmaker born in 1954. Her parents were heavily involved in theater and opera. They founded the New Zealand Players. Campion initially began her career as a painter, but found it very limiting and started making short films in the 80s. She's the only woman thus far to be nominated twice for Best Director. Throughout her career, she has received 2 Oscars, 2 BAFTAs, and 2 Golden Globes for the film Power of the Dog. She co-wrote and directed the series Top of the Lake, starring Elizabeth Moss, which won several Emmys and Golden Globes, and was very critically acclaimed. Her notable films include An Angel at My Table from 1990, The Piano in 1993, which won multiple Oscars, In the Cut from 2003, this very kind of dark thriller, which is sort of different from the work that she usually does. It stars Meg Ryan and Mark Ruffalo. Bright Star from 2009, which is a sort of romantic portrait of the poet John Keats. And then, of course, Power of the Dog from 2021. One of my favorite movies of that year, a movie that I really need to revisit soon. I was just kind of blown away by the performances and the cinematography and the way that that film moves and the way that it kind of slowly unfurls. It was the kind of hot pick for the Oscars that year and was upset by Coda. Next is Joanna Hogg. Joanna Hogg is a British writer and director born in 1960. She worked as a photographer and began making experimental films on a camera that she actually borrowed from Derek Jarman, who was an early mentor of hers. She starts directing music videos and British television right out of film school. Her work is often very personal. It often earns very high critical acclaim. Her movies are very picaresque. They're these subdued, quiet dramas that are filled with tension and so much Just really interesting mise-en-scène. She was championed early in her career by none other than Martin Scorsese, who produced The Souvenir and The Souvenir Part 2, which is her autobiographical two-part work about this whirlwind relationship she was in with an older man and his subsequent suicide, and then the fallout of that, all while she's trying to make her thesis student film. I just watched The Souvenir Part 2 last night after seeing the first one a few years ago and was just blown away by it. It's a really stunning piece of metatextual fiction / nonfiction filmmaking. She frequently collaborates with Tom Hiddleston, especially in her early works, and Tilda Swinton, who has been in many of her films. Her notable films include Archipelago from 2010, starring Tom Hiddleston, Exhibition from 2013, The Souvenir Part 1, which was released in 2019, starring Honor Swinton Byrne as the sort of surrogate character for Joanna Hogg herself, and Tom Burke as the charismatic but drug addict older man she becomes engaged with. The Souvenir Part 2 was released in 2021, and then 2022 she released The Eternal Daughter, which was kind of a spiritual third part of that group of work. Although I haven't seen that movie, I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I hope that I can find it soon. Next is Julia Ducournau. She's a French filmmaker born in 1983. Her parents were in the medical field, which I think possibly sparked this early interest in the body and in things relating to the body in her mind. Her first short film is about a girl who contracts a stomach bug, then sheds her skin like a snake. Her films deal directly with body horror through this unflinching, unafraid camera work and graphic, brutal violence, very intense performances. Her first film, Raw, relates this monstrosity and changing bodies through this coming-of-age puberty movie. I was very affected by it the first time I saw it. I've almost been afraid to watch it since. Her second film, Titan, completely knocked me out the first time I tried to watch it. I couldn't even finish it. It was so just kind of viscerally affecting. Titan, of course, won the Palme d'Or at Cannes in 2021, and making her the second female filmmaker after Jane Campion to win that award. Ducournau has only made the two films so far, Raw from 2016 and Titan from 2021. So it's easy to catch up on her work, but her style and her ability to craft these very unique, very disturbing stories is what brings her to this list for me, and I hope she makes another movie very soon. Next, we have Karyn Kusama. Karyn Kusama is an American filmmaker of Japanese and Irish descent, born in 1968. She won Best Director and the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance in 2000 for her debut feature, Girl Fight, starring Michelle Rodriguez. Early in her career, she worked as an assistant for John Sayles in the 90s, which led to her writing the film Girl Fight, which Sayles also produced. She had a terrible experience working on the big studio movie Aeon Flux, which was critically panned and a box office failure, and also made it very hard for her to find work for several years. She saw commercial success with Jennifer's Body, which became a kind of cult classic in recent years, a movie that I dearly love and will be covering again very soon, next season, on my podcast. Since 2018, she's primarily worked in prestige TV. She's produced lots of things. She currently produces the series Yellow Jackets on Showtime. Her notable films include Jennifer's Body, the crazy, wild, schlocky horror comedy from 2009, starring Megan Fox and Amanda Seyfried. The Invitation, a very interesting little tight thriller from 2015, and Destroyer from 2018, her last feature film, I believe, starring Nicole Kidman and Sebastian Stan. Next is Kathryn Bigelow. Kathryn Bigelow is an American director, producer, and screenwriter born in 1951. She's the first woman to win the Oscar for Best Director for The Hurt Locker in 2008. She's known for gritty crime dramas and espionage thrillers. She initially studied painting and worked and lived with the painter and filmmaker Julian Schnabel and artist Richard Serra for a while. After her small lesser seen genre works like The Loveless and Near Dark, she breaks into the mainstream with the film Point Break, starring Patrick Swayze and Keanu Reeves. An incredible movie. I just got a beautiful new Steelbook 4K of it from Shout Factory. Her work often tackles social issues and also attempts to upend conventional film standards. She's a terrific director of action at the way she blocks scenes and sets up sequences, set pieces. It's all just very thrilling stuff, and you're never bored watching her movies. Her first film was in 1981 called The Loveless. It's a kind of biker story starring Willem Dafoe, his first film as well. This was co-directed with Monty Montgomery. Next, she made the film Near Dark in 1987, a vampire movie that I dearly love, and I talked about it at length on my 1987 episode of the pod, and you can go back and check that out if you want to hear my thoughts on Near Dark, which is an amazing movie. Then Point Break, which I mentioned, from 1991. Other films include Strange Days from 1996, The Hurt Locker from 2008, which of course won her Best Picture and Best Director, and then Zero Dark 30, starring Jessica Chastain, from 2012. Finally, we have Sofia Coppola. Sofia Coppola is an American filmmaker and actress born in 1971 to Eleanor Coppola and Francis Ford. Perhaps you've heard of them. She has won an Oscar, a Golden Globe, a Golden Lion, and a Cannes Award, and has been nominated for 3 BAFTAs and a Primetime Emmy. Coppola made her acting debut in The Godfather, billed at the time as Domino, and had supporting roles in her father's movies Peggy Sue Got Married and The Godfather 3, but she never really wanted to be an actress. She initially studied fashion and photography and worked as a model before starting her own fashion line. In 1998, she directed the short film Lick the Star, which combined all of her interests of photography, music, and fashion. She's been known throughout the years for several collaborations with Kirsten Dunst. They worked very well together, as well as a public relationship with Spike Jonze from 1999 to 2003. Both parties ended up making films centered on their marriage and the breakup of their marriage. She won the Screenplay Oscar for Lost in Translation, that very film that she made in response to the end of their relationship. She became the second woman after Jane Campion to win Screenplay Oscar. Her notable films include The Virgin Suicides from 1999, which was a phenomenal hit and has since become an enormous cult classic. Lost in Translation, my personal favorite of her films, starring, of course, Scarlett Johansson and Bill Murray. It's a beautiful, just completely engrossing portrait of these two people who are just desperately seeking a friend and find each other in this wild world of Tokyo, and I love everything about it. I watch this movie every couple of years. Her very interesting Marie Antoinette movie starring Kirsten Dunst again, a very cool, fun, and fashionable movie. Somewhere from 2010, The Beguiled from 2017, a gorgeous looking movie, one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. And then most recently, Priscilla from 2023, which I talked about in my top 23 of 2023 episode of the podcast. I really love that movie. I love the soundtrack, the way that Kaylee Spaney plays that part, the very literal differences between those two characters and how they are signified through the filmmaking. I just recently got a nice little French import edition of Priscilla from JM Video in Paris when I was there recently. Anyway, that's my list. These are just 10 of the many, many, many incredible women filmmakers that are all over the world and have contributed just untold amounts of creativity and passion to cinema. I'll be highlighting a lot of these films coming up on the podcast, so be sure to check that out. Do all the liking and subscribing and following and all that business so that you get these episodes wherever you get your podcasts delivered straight to you whenever they're released. Anyway, that's all I have. Happy Women's History Month. And until next time, happy viewing.